Once upon a time there lived a woman named Priya. For 10 years, Priya had been the heart and soul of her home. She had chosen to be a full-time housewife, dedicating herself to her husband and their 2 children. Every morning she woke up at dawn, the first rays of sunlight barely peeking through the curtains, and began her day with the same routine she had perfected over the years. Breakfast was served at precisely 7 a.m., the house was spotless by noon, and dinner was always on the table by 7:30 p.m. On the outside, it seemed like she was living the perfect life, an ideal, happy family with a doting wife and mother at its center. But today, as she sat alone at the kitchen table, the ticking clock echoed the silent truth she had been grappling with. She glanced around the house, her eyes lingering on the spotless counters, the freshly vacuumed carpets, and the neatly arranged photo frames on the wall. Everything was in its place, except her sense of self. Priya hadn't always been a housewife. 10 years ago, she was a bright, ambitious woman with a promising career in marketing. She had dreams of climbing the corporate ladder, of making a name for herself in the world. But after the birth of their first child, she and her husband, Raj, made the decision that she would stay home. It seemed sensible at the time, they both wanted to give their children the best upbringing, and they could afford for her not to work. She remembered the first few years as a housewife. They were full of joy, despite the long hours and the constant demands of raising a young child. She found fulfillment in the smiles of her children, in the warmth of a clean and welcoming home, and in the loving words of her husband. But as the years passed, that fulfillment started to wane, replaced by a gnawing sense of emptiness. The truth was, Priya had lost herself in the process of caring for others. Her days were consumed by tasks that, while necessary, felt endless and unappreciated. There were no promotions, no pay raises, no pats on the back. Just a perpetual loop of chores that reset every morning. She had lost touch with her friends, had no time for hobbies, and her professional skills had grown rusty. The world outside her home seemed to move on without her, while she remained frozen in time. One of the dangers of being a full-time housewife, she realized, was the isolation. She was surrounded by people all day, but rarely engaged in meaningful conversations. The adult interaction she once took for granted was now a luxury, reserved for the few times she managed to catch up with old colleagues or friends. And as much as she loved her children, the lack of intellectual stimulation left her feeling unfulfilled. Financial dependence was another trap she hadn't anticipated. Raj was a good man, but even in the best of marriages, the power dynamics shift when one partner holds the purse strings. Priya hated asking for money, even if it was for necessities. It wasn't that Raj ever refused, he was always generous, but the mere act of asking made her feel small, like she was asking for permission rather than sharing in a partnership. And then there was the loss of identity. For years, she was known as Raj's wife or Rohan and Anya's mother. Her own name, her own achievements, had faded into the background. She missed the sense of purpose that came from setting her own goals and achieving them. She missed feeling proud of something she had done solely for herself. Priya sighed, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. She wondered if it was too late to reclaim some of what she had lost. The thought of going back to work after a decade felt daunting, almost impossible. Her skills were outdated, and the job market was ruthless. The idea of sitting in an interview and explaining the 10-year gap in her resume filled her with dread. But more than that, she feared the judgment of others. Would they see her as a failure for wanting more than the life she had? Would her children resent her for spending less time at home? The guilt of even considering such things weighed heavily on her. Yet, the real danger of being a full-time housewife, Priya realized, was not just about the loss of financial independence or the erosion of her professional skills. It was about the quiet, almost imperceptible way her dreams had been sidelined. It was about the way her voice had become a whisper in the cacophony of her family's needs. It was the slow, steady diminishment of her sense of self. Priya knew that she had to make a change. She didn't want her children to grow up thinking that a woman's place was solely in the home. She wanted her daughter to see that it was okay to have ambitions, and for her son to understand that domestic responsibilities were not just a woman's burden. She took a deep breath, setting her cup down with a resolve she hadn't felt in years. She would start small, perhaps by taking an online course or volunteering. She would reconnect with old friends, start carving out time for herself, and little by little, reclaim the parts of her that had been lost. Priya knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy. She would have to face her fears, challenge the status quo, and, most importantly, believe in herself again. But as she glanced at the clock and saw the hands move forward, she felt a glimmer of hope. It was time to step out of the shadows and start living for herself, as well as for those she loved. The journey of rediscovery had begun, and Priya was ready to face it, one step at a time. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon, and Priya was hosting her niece, Meera, and a few of her teenage friends for a study group. The house buzzed with youthful energy as they spread out their books and laptops across the dining table. The chatter and laughter reminded Priya of her own teenage years, full of dreams and possibilities. She watched them from the kitchen, a bittersweet smile on her face, as she prepared snacks for the group. After a while, the conversation shifted from math problems to life plans. Meera, a bright-eyed 17-year-old with aspirations of becoming a software engineer, expressed her excitement about college applications. One of her friends, Shruti, mentioned wanting to travel the world before settling down, and another, Ananya, chimed in about her desire to start her own business someday. "I'm definitely going to work," Shruti said confidently. "I can't imagine just staying at home all day. My mom keeps telling me that I should focus on finding a good husband, but that's the last thing on my mind." "Yeah," Ananya agreed. "I mean, staying at home sounds so boring. I want to be my own boss, not just someone's wife." Priya couldn't help but overhear their conversation. She leaned against the kitchen counter, their words striking a chord deep within her. She remembered being their age, full of similar dreams. She walked over to the dining table, setting down a tray of sandwiches and juice. "You know," Priya began, her voice calm yet firm, "there's nothing wrong with wanting to be a wife or a mother. But I think it's important to remember that being a full-time housewife isn't just about cooking, cleaning, or taking care of a family. It's a choice that comes with consequences, some that aren't always obvious at first." The girls looked at her, a bit surprised by the sudden turn in the conversation. Meera raised an eyebrow, sensing that her aunt was about to share something important. "What do you mean, Aunt Priya?" Meera asked, curious. Priya pulled out a chair and sat down, her expression thoughtful. "I chose to be a housewife 10 years ago. It was a decision that seemed right at the time, Raj, and I thought it would be best for our kids. But what I didn't realize was how much of myself I would lose in the process. I put my own dreams on hold, thinking I would get back to them someday. But someday kept getting pushed further away." She glanced around the room, seeing the attentive faces of the girls. Being a full-time housewife can be fulfilling, but it can also be isolating. It's easy to lose your identity when everything revolves around your family. And once you step away from the workforce, it's hard to get back in. The world moves on without you, and suddenly, you're left wondering where your place is. Shruti shifted in her seat, her earlier confidence slightly shaken. "But isn't it good to focus on your family? My mom says that's what's most important." "Family is important, absolutely," Priya agreed. "But so are you. Your dreams, your ambitions, your sense of purpose, those matter too. You can love your family and still have a career, hobbies, or interests outside of them. The danger is in giving up too much of yourself. No one tells you that when you're home all day, every day, you might start to feel invisible. Or that financial dependence can make you feel trapped, even if your partner is supportive." Ananya nodded slowly. "So, you're saying we shouldn't settle for just being a housewife?" "I'm saying don't settle for anything less than what you want for yourself," Priya said gently. "Don't let anyone else define what your life should look like. If you want to work, work. If you want to travel, travel. If you want to start a business, go for it. But whatever you do, make sure it's your choice. And if you do decide to be a housewife, do it with your eyes open. Understand that it's not the easy option, it comes with its own set of challenges. Mira, who had been quietly absorbing her aunt's words, finally spoke up. But what if we change our minds? Like, what if we start on one path and then realize we want something else? Priya smiled warmly. That's the beauty of life, you're allowed to change your mind. But it's much easier to pivot when you have options. Keep your skills sharp, maintain your network, and don't lose touch with who you are outside of your roles as a wife or mother. Life is long, and your dreams will evolve. Just don't let them get buried under the weight of someone else's expectations. The girls sat in silence, digesting Priya's advice. The rain pattered softly against the windows, a rhythmic reminder of the passage of time. Priya hoped that her words would stay with them, guiding them as they navigated their own journeys. I wish someone had told me these things when I was your age, Priya added, her voice tinged with a mix of regret and hope. It's easy to get caught up in the idea of a perfect life, one where everything fits neatly into boxes. But life is messy, and sometimes, the best paths are the ones that are hardest to see. The girls nodded, their expressions thoughtful. They thanked Priya for her advice, and soon returned to their study session, though the conversation had clearly left an impression. As Priya watched them from the kitchen, she felt a sense of peace. She couldn't change her past, but she could use her experiences to help others make more informed choices. Perhaps, in sharing her story, she could light the way for these young women, so they could forge their own paths with confidence and clarity. And in that small but meaningful way, Priya began to reclaim her own voice, one conversation at a time.